Faith can loosely be defined as a belief in an all-powerful sky-dwelling deity that does tricks only in ancient books, but still loves you today, and no evidence is really needed for its existence. This type of faith we are all familiar with as a belief system. There is, of course, another type of faith that is based on evidence that we conclude with reason. This is often overlooked or even dismissed as real faith altogether, as it is purely on evidence that is gathered with facts. This is, of course, your faith in other people, based purely on what you learn about them through day-to-day interaction. When we need help in any task in life, we build a personal catalogue of likes and dislikes we find in other people's actions and personalities from which we can draw on. If it is help with gardening you need, then it may be Uncle X that you would turn to based on the evidence of how his own garden looks. Any number of differing choices in everyday life needs faith in our very well-being. Even a recommendation needs a trusting faith in the person who gives it. You would possibly not take a recommendation on where to buy your clothes based on where your grandmother shops, or even avoid the shop purely because it's where she goes. So in a way, faith in what people say or do is the same as a deity, in the sense of evidence is really needed that is concrete to a claim. However, if someone you love or trust is convincing enough in what they say, we seem to throw out the obvious reasoning and rely instead on the person's reputation and past actions to form a basis for true belief and faith in them. If someone makes a claim which is true, yet that person is well known as a liar or a scoundrel within a society, then no faith will ever be put in the truth. In reverse, the consequences of an upstanding member within a society, or a close friend in whom you have faith and trust, may tell you a lie, whether on purpose or unwittingly. If, for instance, this person tells a story of a ghostly encounter that may, in truth, be quite explainable by natural means that could not have been seen at the time, this story will lead to a general acceptance that this story must be true. So we will now find an untrue ghost story being reported as fact within a society. Several close friends and trustworthy acquaintances have told me tales of ghostly apparitions, sounds, smells and temperature changes that seemingly defy all natural explanation and thus, by default, can only be supernatural, apparently. Now ask yourself if you have ever been in a similar situation, in which the acquaintance is telling a story, yet you were also there at the time, and it soon becomes clear that the story is being told in a way that you do not remember it. I had a friend who often told the story of how he drove his car around a corner only to be confronted by an accident in the road. Too late to brake, he was forced to take evasive action that relied upon his superior driving skill. He launched his car up an embankment, steered around traffic signs and returned to the road with only minor scratches to the bodywork. I had a different recollection of the event, as I was a passenger in the back seat. I remember seeing trouble ahead even before the corner and shouted, "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" and then curled up ready for the impact. That should never have happened if the idiot had started braking before I'd even got to the point of shouting. He managed to smash his way past one of the cars, then rebounded up an embankment, narrowly missing the concrete post of a traffic sign and causing considerable damage to both his and the other vehicle. My point is that if I had not been in the car with him, I would probably be impressed by the story, or at least have had no reason not to take what he said as the full truth. As time passes and the story of this accident has been told many times, I'm utterly convinced that he feels that on that day he drove very well indeed, and this is another problem with factual accounts. People can convince themselves of things that are not true. When it comes to stories, they're often made up and embellished in order to make them seem a bit more interesting, and ghost stories are prime examples. An old friend of mine reminded me recently of a story of seeing a ghost through a window at our old school. It was an old castle, and peering across the centre courtyard into a window beyond, a white, transparent, ghostly figure was clearly seen walking the corridor beyond, believed to be none other than the ghost of Catherine of Aragon, the first wife of Henry VIII, who had been kept there after her divorce. The story was further embellished by the fact that the feet could not be seen as the corridors had been replaced and the new level was higher. As if this was not enough, the story also had another twist. A second witness. Having multiple witnesses to a ghost story is a definitive proof, reassuring the listener that there was no hallucination or effects of a drinking binge. In fact, witnesses are really cool. They can be used as an alibi in a crime or an art expert that confirms the old painting in the attic is indeed a Van Gogh or Van Gogh. Surely this story has to be true. On further investigation, this story had been made up on the back of a meme, embellished and passed off as the truth. The term meme was coined by Richard Dawkins to explain how certain introductions into a society are incorporated as truth or culture and passed down through the generations. Anyway, to start with, the story of Catherine of Aragon haunting the castle of Kimbolton was well established long before her arrival at that boarding school in the early 1970s. The castle had undergone extensive alterations in the 18th century, so the corridor and the feet story was to be expected as an embellishment. The biggest shock was added by the witness, and the witness was named as none other than me. Now, if the story was true, I think I would have remembered it. However, I do remember a film crew from the BBC on a regional programme called Look East, visiting to do a programme on haunted castles. A boy had been selected to be interviewed about seeing a ghost, but it seemed that he managed to escape and had no intention of looking the fool. I was in a dormitory at the time, and one of the prefects ordered me to take his place. So there I was, on prime time TV, lying about a ghost that had not been seen or was ever likely to. I'm ashamed to say now that I added to the world's beliefs in supernatural bullshit, and to make things worse became the subject of considerable mockery amongst my fellow pupils and teachers. Looking back, however, I don't blame them. So my point is that it can be just as easy to convince people of nonsense in small ways, such as the various guises of the spiritual New Age movement, for instance, as it can in any other type of religion. It does, however, rely mainly on a one-to-one type of trust and faith, whereas organised religions have the luxury of passing down nonsense, primarily through well-indoctrinated groups, often from religions they are born into or through parental culture in which they're expected to stay. Religions or belief systems need strong, convincing characters that you can have a personal faith in so they can survive, thrive and grow. The larger the personality, the larger the lie. It is unlikely that I could have pulled off a story about a visit from the Archangel Gabriel without much laughter and ridicule. Yet if I was a successful warlord with an army to command, it is unlikely that the people would want to argue the point with me. It is a much safer and sensible position to just nod in agreement. If any proof is needed for this, then look at North Korea. They showed classic examples at the funeral of the self-serving godlike leader Kim Jong-il, in a country that's political prison camps that even shock Amnesty International. Here we saw an entire country display the worst cry acting in the history of drama. You did not need to be a drama critic to realise that this surreal display was faked. Even the commentators had to pretend to be crying during the event. In some shots, however, you can see those filming the occasion who seem to be in some way immune to the mass hysteria of emotional heartbreak. Then again, if it's bad acting you want, then that's what you get if the alternative is enslavement, torture, death, or all three. Perhaps as a special offer. In effect, the people of North Korea have faith that they will endure a living hell without obedience to a living God substitute. So generally it's the characters within to which we give religions and any belief system respect, based once again on personal faith, even though fear can give a similar appearance. Let's look at this in another way. Would you join a church in which its leading figure was a well-known local homeless dropout? Let's add to this divine revelation that claims his poverty and sleeping on a park bench is God's way of showing you that through giving to him and an act of charity you can find a true path to eternal happiness. I'm expecting most people to say no at this point, but strangely religious or cult leaders can and do use these traits to their advantage. Let's skip for a moment to India and take a fleeting look at Jainist monks. Here we find homeless, naked men that wander from one village to another begging for food that must be uncooked fruit and nuts, spending each day either in study or in preaching. Of course, this may not be everyone's idea of fun, but this parasitic lifestyle can have its advantages if you are lazy and in a poor country. I for one cannot see the appeal, and if everyone acted in this seemingly carefree way that is disguised as suffering, then no one would ever work and no food would ever be available to be offered as a feeling of personal salvation. It is probably more of a tradition that keeps these men fed, and it's hard to believe that religion of this kind would ever start in modern Western culture, but at some point in time this religion gained a foothold and still flourishes today with about 2 million members in India. Interestingly, as a footnote, its emblem, the swastika, was used by the German Nazi Party for its representation of peace and non-violence. So it is not impossible for even a homeless man to start a cult. Stranger things have happened and still happen today. In my own hometown, for instance, there are people who place moonstone under their pillows to help them sleep or wear crystals to relieve toothache. So bearing all this in mind, this is an introduction to future videos in which I'll be looking into the world of the New Age Bowel movement. It's a subject so vast that I cannot cover it in just one video. So we'll be looking at the individual little parts as we go. Peace.